Namaste, my name is Ojasvi Chandok and I welcome you to Series 4 of the Festival of Bharat. We are a platform that believes in having open and civilized discourse. And today, here with us, we have Nilesh Nilkanth Oak ji. Nilesh ji is an author, a researcher, and a corporate consultant. He holds a BS and MS in chemical engineering and an executive MBA. He has published 3 books and writes extensively on ancient Indian history. Unlike many other Indologists who focus only on the historical and the philosophical aspect of Indic civilization, Nileshji also emphasizes scientific and deductive reasoning in making his case. He has an adjunct faculty at the Institute of Advanced Studies in the United States. Nileshji, namaskar, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Namaskar, Ojasvi, and I'm very glad to be here.
Nileshji, my first question to you is that we keep hearing that Sanatan Dharam is not a religion. Could you please tell us what is the difference between Sanatan Dharam and, say, Islam or Christianity for that matter?
Thank you. We have a special challenge when we are dealing in our social or educational surrounding right now, because if you have to fill a form anywhere, the question usually would be there, what is your religion? And naturally, I or you would put Hindu next to it. So in that sense, we have to fill the gap and call it a religion. And therefore, in that sense, in a generic sense, people would equate Hinduism with a religion. Now, what is the basis of a Hindu dharma? Like if you just look at the dharma as a word, that means dhru. From that word, the word tree comes. Like dhru is to stand, is to sustain, is like a truth, what is. In that sense, these are the different roots. So then what is dharma? Dharma is that sustains us. Dharma is something that allows us to have a wonderful life, wonderful experience, and so on. It is truthful. That's where the word tree comes. Okay, and it comes from a dhru. It also teaches us endurance, that some things that may not just the benefit that you're looking for may not come right away, or you have to pay the price. So there is a karma. The theory of a karma is very fundamental to the Hindu dharma. Now, against that, when you look at, say, Abrahamic religions, for example, Judaism and then Christianity and Islam, the religion as a word, its origin goes back to connecting. I'm putting it in a simple fashion, to connect something. Now, sometimes connect what? Connect people, a group of people. It could be in one location. It could be a people who are connected by a certain thought, a certain individual, and so on. So briefly, if I have to describe the Abrahamic religions, I'm going to take help of Joseph Campbell, who was a great American. And he described it like this. He said, and I agree with that, and I like that actually. He said, Judaism, think of it as a chosen people of God. So as their religious construct, it's a chosen community, a chosen people of God. If you think of Christianity, as much as we think of a Jesus and all that words that you will hear, it is a salvation through community. Okay, so a lot of emphasis on the community work. And then Islam is, as many of you know, many of us know, it's the importance is of the book, whatever is written in the book, in the Quran. Now, that makes them different from what Hindu Dharma is, because Hindu Dharma is a library as opposed to a one specific book or a one specific savior or one specific race to be a chosen race of God.
Right. Nileshji, we've been hearing all of these conversations, at least a lot in the recent times, about what being a Hindu is or what Hindutva is. Could you please tell us what exactly is Hindutva?
Very good question. There's so much you hear in the social media about Hinduism and Hindutva. The one that I would have heard recently, and you tell me if you heard something different, is the some people will say Hinduism is okay, but Hindutva is not okay. Okay, I mean, have you heard the similar
Yes,
thing?
I've
Okay,
heard it before.
yeah, and I just go into a laughter. Well, just as a metaphor, if or a simile, if I can use, think of the theory of atomism. Okay, and I'm not referring to the Indian old theory of atomism, although it's very fascinating and it's very close to the modern science. And I'm not referring to the Greek atomism. But atomism essentially, as a theory, proposed that everything is made up of very small, minute particles, minute entities that we may not even able to see or sometimes may not able to perceive. Okay, so from that atomism, and then we have atoms. Or in modern science, we have now atoms into subatomic particles like electrons, protons, neutrons, and so on. But we'll just stick with this for this simple comparison. Now imagine somebody saying that, hey, you can believe in atomism. Atomism, modern atomism is okay, like post Dalton and all the modern quantum science. But atoms are not okay. Now that will be laughable. That is the same thing people tend to say, and I laugh at it. So Hinduism is okay, but Hindutva is not okay. Which is to say, if you look at the periodic table for all the atomic elements and therefore, oxygen. So it's like a oxygenism, if there is a word like that, is okay, but oxygenitva is not okay. So what is Hinduism? Because to do a comparison with other isms, the whole Hindu dharma is put it under Hinduism, and for practical purposes, that's perfectly okay, as long as we truly understand the meaning of it. Now, Hindutva is actually a tattva is actually understanding the essence of it and practicing it. So they are not any different. Call it by any names, whether call it Hinduism or Hindutva. So Hindutva, being Hindu, I mean, following Hindutva is following Hinduism. No difference.
Right. Nileshji, some of the Marxist propagandists have tried to limit the true understanding of Indian history in various different ways. You have dedicated your life to better understanding of our history, and you've done some really fantastic work in dating elements of our itihas.
Hmm.
What archaeological and other scientific evidences have you encountered which proves what a lot of us already know, which is that the Sanatan Dharam is far beyond 5,000 years old?
Okay, good question, Ojasvi. So yes, glad you said 5,000 years, because if anyone asks you, not you, anyone asks a typical Hindu individual, like how old is your civilization? Usually people will answer, oh, it's very old, 5,000 plus years old. And I consider that answer extremely lazy and tamasic. So I'm glad you quoted that, which is to say that's what people will say. But as you already are saying it, that it's beyond 5,000 years. So my journey began as a coincidence, rather, with astronomy in the Mahabharata. So I'll not go into the details on that, but it started with Mahabharata and astronomy, specific evidence. Then I used the same astronomy to Ramayana. But then what I found, and you mentioned archaeology, then I found all the different disciplines of science. If the evidence exists and if we bring them together in like a jigsaw puzzle fashion, like solving the crossword puzzle or the Rubik's cube, trying to put the pieces together, what emerges is extremely impressive. So just to give you a number, I mean, 5,000 years ago looks like yesterday. Okay, that is how a deep antiquity emerges for Indian civilization. And so what are some of the sciences? So archaeology, just the pure archaeology that is done in India takes us back to 7,000 BC. So that's like 9,000 years. And when I say archaeology, I'm referring to a very reductionist view of archaeology, which is to dig in some place and find some metal objects, hooks and pots and pans, and then date them. Actually, archaeology as a discipline has moved way further than the pots and pans business, okay, or finding some old objects. If you look at hydrology, if you look at geology, geophysics, geochemistry, oceanography, climatology, these are all areas of archaeology because they tell us about our past. Okay. And so if you look at the empirical evidence of modern science, and then you start connecting with the ancient Indian narratives, and when I say ancient Indian narratives, I mean, for example, obviously the Itihasa, Mahabharata, Ramayana, Rigveda. Then you look at many other samvitas, either from Ayurveda, from astronomy, other disciplines. A simple picture that emerges, which is so powerful that I would say what it tells us is that our civilization, Indian civilization, is definitely much older than 24,000 years. So that is, so we should give up that 5,000 years old civilization now and start
Dream,
using
right.
the word at least 24,000 years ago, or definitely more than 24,000 years.
Right. Following up on that, we spoke about dating of Mahabharat and Ramayana.
Hmm.
But why do you think is it important to date Mahabharat and Ramayana and Rig Veda? I mean, why can't we just be sort of happy and content with the philosophical and practical guidance that they contain?
Yeah. Okay. No, that's a great question. And so let me just do a Purva Paksha of what you just said, the second part, right? Which is to say, Ramayana, Mahabharata, they are rich in niti vichar, the moral codes. They are rich in the stories. They are rich in how to live our life. Sometimes simple solutions to the life, good stories. How to behave in a certain situation. Why not just be happy with that? And my point is, if there was no way, if there was no evidence that we could empirically test it, which would have allowed us to know when they happened, like put a dating on them, I would have been perfectly fine with it. I mean, we as a Hindu dharma, we were perfectly fine with it. We are fine with it. We will be fine with it. However, if the evidence exists and if we can figure out the dating of those specific events, it has immense value. Just to give you a quick metaphor, for example, if you are a medical doctor and you are diagnosing somebody over a distance, these days it is happening actually, right?
Right.
So Indian doctors are diagnosing patients in America, sometime over a Zoom call like this or whatnot. And now, suppose if it was not possible and just on the phone call, there are many things. If you can always diagnose a patient, but wouldn't you say it is very useful information if you happen to know the person's age, person's gender, whatever the background conditions that person may have, what kind of severe situation, health situation the person is going through, that person's nutrition, and so on, right? So more the pieces of information you have, better the diagnosis is. So what happens? One of the key piece, and it's a very important, very crucial, if we can find it, if we are lucky to find it, is the dating of that specific historical event, because then it gives you a context for science, culture, technology, and civilization. And that has many implications for the grand narrative of India, especially because many others, outsiders, have distorted our narrative.
Right. Right. Talking about our scriptures, what are the foundations of Hindu Dharma? How is it in tune with modernism and true liberalism in its nature?
Okay. Well, good question again. This is a question I would say 90% plus of us Hindus would struggle if somebody says, explain me what is Hinduism. All right. And we wouldn't know where to begin
Right.
sometime. And that's because of the immense deracination that has gone over last 200, 300 years. Now, if somebody asks you the question and you respond to that, they are going to do the comparison with what they think of their own system. And I'm using the word system deliberately, so not to call dharma versus religion, but they are going to make a comparison with religion no matter what, because if it's not Hinduism or the extended Hindu religions like Jainism and Buddhism and Sikhism and Shintoism and all that, then it is a religion. So what are the foundations? That is, I think, your question is, or how it distinguishes and what is the foundation. I describe it with my understanding as three solid foundations. One is vichar swatantra, okay, the freedom of thought that has to do with the intellect. And the whole Hinduism, you will see on the triangle of it, the words used are mano, vak, kaya, sanyama. Okay, the balance, the control, appropriate use of mind, intellect, and a body. So these three foundations go with that. So vichar swatantra, which means the freedom of thought, goes with the intellect. You will not find this in any of the existing religions of the world. Freedom of thought is not there. Okay, not in the religious construct. They can think outside, but not to be questioned. The other one is endurance in conduct. Now that you will find somewhat in other religions too, which is to say there is an emphasis on doing good work, but they don't consider this as the topmost, whereas in Hindu construct it is the topmost thing, the endurance in conduct. Whatever path you follow as your swadharma, you continue to do it. And the third one is a niti vichar, which is the morals, but there is a difference. You can have relative morals, like in certain religion, the slavery of the people that you oppress or you find them during the war, it's okay to make them slaves, for example. That could be the case. What you will find is that when Hinduism is talking of the niti vichar or niti dhrudata, the total conviction in the morals, it is talking of absolute morals. For example, like ahimsa, satyam, asteya, akama, krodha, lobhata. Now its implementation may change based on the time, place, and circumstances. That is true for everything, but these are the three. So freedom of thought, endurance in conduct, and conviction in the absolute morals. Those
Right,
are the three basics of the Hindu religion, or Hindu dharma, I should say.
right. And these are the qualities that makes Hindu Dharma in tune with today's modernism and, in fact, true liberalism, because freedom of thought is actually being a true liberal that
Yeah.
way. Now,
Yes, and if I may add, this endurance in conduct that I refer to, this is very important because it's okay to act with the freedom. I mean, full freedom that is encouraged. However, we can make mistakes, and the path to correction comes from this action. Like there is a, say, in a darshana tradition, which is a how to experience something. Okay, so there is a philosophy, Tattwadnyan, but there is also Darshana, which is to say how to experience that philosophical truths. Okay, and so in that tradition, one of the six Darshana is called Nyaya Darshana, and you know what it says? It says Pravartana Lakshana Dosha, which is to say, it's Sanskrit, of course, but it says only when you act, your defects are seen. So you act with so intellectually you act with the freedom of thought, but then to refine that thinking, you need to act. So these actually they come together as a triangle.
mhm, right. The river Saraswati is mentioned in the Rig Veda, in
Hmm.
Ramayana, in Mahabharata. To what extent do these descriptions of the river Saraswati can be sort of tested and validated on modern scientific research?
Yeah, you asked me my favorite question. Thank you. so so actually the next week I am giving a presentation on this very subject at the International Saraswati Conference. So I'm prepared to answer your question. Okay. Yeah, no, this is something I am studying initially indirectly for 20 plus years, and in the last 10 years very directly into the Saraswati research itself. It's a wonderful research that has been carried out, I would say, over last 100 plus years. So to summarize it, uh, I'll start with from our times. Okay. Now, something beautiful about the Hindu civilization. The river Saraswati that is mentioned in, as you said, Mahabharata, Ramayana, and Rigveda, and many other texts, of course, simply did not exist for last 4,000 years. Last 4,000 years. Okay. I mean, think of it. Most of the other religions simply did not exist 4,000 years ago. Okay. So the Saraswati that is described in these texts did not exist last 4,000 years. And guess what? It is so fresh in the memory of the folks of Hindu civilization. So that's something very fascinating. Now, why is it so fascinating? Now let's go back beyond 2000 BC. If you come to the timing of Mahabharata, Mahabharata has 100, 200 plus specific descriptions of Saraswati. Okay, I'll just go further. Ramayana has few. We are going backwards in time. Okay, and then Rigveda is also very rich in the descriptions of Saraswati. Now, we have to, in order to understand Saraswati, we have to also, I mean, understand in a historical context or itihasa context. We also need the dating of, see, that is another benefit of the dating of the text. Otherwise, purely from a Saraswati point of view, I would say the current evidence, and the very recent evidence comes from like 4 months ago, is telling us that Saraswati, that is described in the Indian text, is definitely older than 170,000 years. So in Indian terms, like close to 2 lakhs. Okay. If you say this some places, people will fall off their chairs because they are thinking it's either mythical, or if it existed, it was some small stream flowing somewhere. That's not the case. So just to tell you the history, if we go back, definitely now the latest empirical evidence, more than 170,000 years. But the Mahabharata timing, the way it is described in the Mahabharata, we are talking 6th millennium BCE, like more than 7,500 years ago. And these 200 plus descriptions of Saraswati impeccably, perfectly match with the descriptions of Mahabharata, but also the descriptions of the 6th millennium BCE, based on the hydrology evidence, based on the climatology evidence, and so on. Ditto for Ramayana. And the grand Saraswati of Rigveda, it is described as like a Naditame, Ambitame, Devitame Saraswati, or Giribhya A Samudrat, like starting from high mountains all the way going to the ocean. The new evidence shows us that those descriptions of Rigveda can only exist before 10,000 years, and they were in its all glory going back to 22,000 BC, 30,000 BC, 50,000 BC, and before that. Very rich evidence for Saraswati.
This is absolutely fantastic to hear. I mean, all of these things that we are supposed to know, but we do not, about dating of our own culture and history. But following up on what we were talking about earlier,
Yeah.
can you tell us when did the War of Kurukshetra happen? A better understanding of timelines, I think, would be really impactful and help us truly understand our own history of India.
Good. So now you are a convert. Okay. You said now the now
Convert.
the now the deadline is important. It is very important. And if we have a time, again, I will explain you in what way it is important. Okay. It is nothing to do just when did the Mahabharata war happen. Many people say, what do we do with that if we just know it? And I'll tell you what we can do with it, or actually what we are doing with it. But before that, just to answer your question. So I told you I started with Mahabharata and the astronomy evidence. In fact, guess what? It started with one simple shlok, or one simple verse from the text of Mahabharata. So just to give you a background, like Mahabharata is huge. I mean, it's the what you can say biggest, longest epic of humanity. So the whole humanity should care. Doesn't matter what part of the world you are. It is like if you combine the Greek epics like Iliad and Odyssey together, then you have to multiply 8 times before you get close to the Mahabharata size. It is that huge. So I started with one verse that I randomly ran into, and just for fun, I will say that maybe that's the only Sanskrit verse I will say. It says, "Ya chaisha vistuta rajas trailokya sadhu sammata arundati tayapesha vasishta prashtata kruta." It said, at the time of the Mahabharata war, the star Arundhati is walking ahead of star Vasishta. So Alcor in the modern astronomy is walking ahead of, or is seen, it's walking ahead of star Mizar. Now,
Mhm.
what's the big deal about it? I will not go into too much detail, but the big deal is that is not how it works today. And that is not how it works 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, or 6,000 years ago. to the extent many of the Mahabharata researchers thought it is a observation that is astronomically impossible. So when I read it 25 years ago, I said, why would Vyasadeva, the author of Mahabharata, would write such a thing? So just based on the reverence, you can say, the Shraddha, the reverence also has a place in scientific research. So just based on that, I said, what if this is true? And then I followed this. I initially thought naively, I will finish this. I will figure this out over a weekend. Then it took me 15 years from 1995 to 2009. But finally, I succeeded. And what I showed actually is that this particular observation, as described in Mahabharata, is only possible for some 5,000 years between 10,000 BC to 4,500 BC. So based on that, you can say that the Mahabharata war must have happened somewhere there. Then I extracted every single astronomy observations. They amount to 300 plus from the Mahabharata text, only Mahabharata text. And then again, I will say solving that like a jigsaw puzzle, like a crossword puzzle. When in a scientific fashion, in an empirical fashion, you put it together, it led me to one specific year, and that year is 5561 BCE. So if you have to know how many years ago, we have to add 2021 to it. That will come 7,582. For simplicity, we can say more than 7,500 years ago. But one important point is, it's not a range. So the year of a Mahabharata war, when I say 5561 BCE, many people will say, oh, you mean to say around somewhere around 5,500. I'm not saying somewhere around. I'm saying it's the evidence, the empirical, objectively testable astronomy evidence in Mahabharata text is so precise and accurate that you can say only 5561 BC, not even 5570 BC, or not even 5555 BC.
Right. Talking about dating these scriptures, is it possible to date the Rig Veda and the Upanishads? Uh,
Now, go ahead. Sorry, I don't
right.
want to interrupt you.
Is it possible to date the Rig Veda and the Upanishads, the Ayurveda Samhita, or the Indian astronomy text that we have?
Okay. So no, that is a great question. Just bear it in mind that it's a kind of loaded question. Loaded only in this sense, you have included many different genre of ancient Indian narratives in it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll split it little bit for you, because that's only how it can be answered. So for example, Rigveda, so Mahabharata is a historical event, Ramayana is a historical event, so it is a specific date. Now Rigveda is not an event, right? It is a knowledge that has been accumulated over a long period of time. So in case of Rigveda, what we can do is we can say how far back we can go, just like that Saraswati answer.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
How far back we can go, and this is what I will tell you. This is my research, okay, and I would say it's an ongoing research, and I'm always open to any kind of critique, and that's true for my Mahabharata dating or Ramayana dating. This is now 10 years and nobody has come forward. I mean, people will say all kinds of things, but when I ask them to come forward and debate, then not many people have shown up. So to answer the question on the Rigveda, for example, it appears that some portions of Rigveda are contemporary or contemporaneous with the Mahabharata time. And again, we can understand why that would be so, because Mahabharata tells us, or many of our texts tells us, that Vyasadeva, the author of Mahabharata, rearranged, recasted, re-edited the Vedas, including Rigveda. So that therefore he might have included some stuff there. But if you take the descriptions from Rigveda and then try to corroborate that with the empirical evidence from the modern disciplines of science, then as I said, we definitely can go back to 24,000, beyond 24,000 years. But we can also find some other epochs, such as like 26,000 BC, 28,000 BC, 34,000 BC, 38,000 BC. But I'm going to actually stop at that and say, based on the limited work that I have done or some of my co-researchers have done, we can say that definitely it goes back beyond 40,000 BC. But as to how far back, we don't know the answer. At least I don't know the answer. Oh, and then you ask about, sorry, I don't know. Then you ask Upanishad. Now, Upanishad is a tricky business because, see, we have to be lucky to have a kind of evidence that we can test. And very rarely we find that in Upanishad. Sometimes we do, but Upanishad is again another whole set of books, so I'll not go there. So in general, Upanishads are not not easy to date. And yes, we can date it, and I have dated some, but that comes through indirect dating. For example, it will mention some character and some story of, say, Mahabharata, in which case I know it is definitely after 5561 BCE. In that sense, we can date it. And quickly, your last one, see, Samvitas, and you said Ayurveda. Ayurveda, yeah. So Sushruta Samhita, for example, based on the internal evidence, I have dated it going back to definitely 2000, 3000 BC. And it's not to say that Sushruta Samhita was written in 3000 BC. More than likely, and there is enough evidence to say what I'm going to say, more than likely it was updated 3000 BC. And if you have to think of the timing of Sushruta, I have shown using this kind of research that it definitely goes back more than 8,000 years. And quickly, I'll make a one-liner statement for Surya Siddhanta, unless you ask me more question, which is Surya Siddhanta. Again, there are many epochs. Let me just quickly tell you the numbers. Again, we don't know how old, but there are instances, some data that is in Surya Siddhanta that we can say was updated in 580 CE, which is 1500 years ago, going back to 3000 BC, 5500 BC, 7800 BC, 12,000 BC, 14,500 BC, 38,000 BC. So Surya Siddhanta, it also goes definitely back to 40,000 years and beyond. How far back, we don't know.
Right. Nilesh ji, another question that I have is that, a lot of people sort of distort key messages of even simple Sanskrit words and sentences, especially in the Vedic texts.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you must have heard these arguments and examples before. For instance, somebody would say that, oh, Sita ji had to go through Agni Pariksha, right? Or Karan was told that he can't participate in Draupadi's Swayamvar. Could you please tell us why this keeps on happening again and again? And I am sure it is related to some sort of motivation or intent, as well as maybe linguistic competence. So could you please shed a light on this?
Okay, again, a great question, possibly 3 points there. One is the linguistic competence or the nature of a language, which is to say one word can have multiple meanings depending on the context, which is very true for Sanskrit. Okay, so let's give a benefit of doubt to the people who may end up with different meanings. That's possible. The second one is driven by agenda, right? So for example, you want to if you choose to find only good things in a certain text or only bad things, you can do it. Why just text? In science, we say, if you have some weird or wild theory, and all the revolutionary theories are wild theories, by the way, but I'm saying if you're looking for evidence that supports your theory, you will find it. If you're looking for evidence that supports that goes against a certain theory, you will find it. So that is not a surprise. So now some of the instances that you mentioned, why do they happen? One reason is it could be agenda. Okay, and I will repeat what I said before. So only through their actions we can find out. We have to analyze their actions and their tweets, I would say, these days, to find out where are they going, right? And so again, the word that is used is a pravartana lakshana dosha. Only when people act, then we come to know what is their intention, what is their hidden intention, so to say. And that same text, Nyaya Darshana, also says 3 types of things why these things can be distorted or misunderstood. Either you are very attached to a certain outcome, or number 2, you detest a certain outcome, another outcome, let's say. And third, it says muda. So the Sanskrit words used are raga, dvesha, and muda. So raga is an attachment to certain thing, dvesha is a detestation, like hating a certain outcome, and muda is just a sheer lack of intellect, just that ability is not there to do that. So those are some of the reasons. Now, one more thing I want to add quickly, which is to say, we have to be very careful, all of us, in taking a instance, something that happened, say, 14,000 years ago, like Ramayana, or 7,500 years ago, like Mahabharata, or some Rigvedic narration that goes beyond 24,000 years. We have to analyze it in the context of those times. for example, I'm in America, and I'll tell you here the a great personality, and I love him, is Ben Franklin, the one of the founders of American Revolution and whatnot. Now, if we just say right now, with all this liberal and all that discussion that you will be hearing, now he had a slave. His name was John, right? And he decided that when Ben Franklin, he meaning Ben Franklin, when he dies, that his slave should let be free. But until he died, he decided to keep him as a slave, number one. Now, I have a great respect for Ben Franklin. I'm fascinated by that personality. But my point is, if we have to think of some of the great philosophy that Ben Franklin came forward with, which I'm fascinated, if you try to mix it with the some social norms that he was behaving, which was considered very normal of his time, we can criticize him today. That is fine. But we cannot use that against him to even understand some of the good things he did.
Right.
So if we have to understand Rama, if you have to understand Krishna, or whoever we have to understand in the context that they grew up, or in the context that they were serving. And these were considered Yuga Purush, okay, like epoch maker, because they were revolutionaries for their times, just like Ben Franklin was for his time.
Right, but my question then is, how do you do that, right? Because let's take Mahabharat for
Hmm.
instance.
Yeah.
If reading it is going to take so many attempts, because there's just so much complexity and so many values and morals that one can get from just reading it once,
Hmm.
and it can happen again and again. How do we sort of understand what the situation was during those times?
Ah, brilliant question, by the way. Wonderful on a multiple grounds, but I'll cover maybe two. One is, how do we know what was the social setup there, or whatever the situation, and how do we analyze it? Okay. Well, some cases we are lucky and we know the kind of social setup was based on the descriptions in these epics. So that's possible. Other times we may not be so lucky. Okay. But I want to give another perspective, couple other perspective. One is, some of these things that are mentioned there, we can actually do a comparison with our times, just like I did, for example, a minute ago with Ben Franklin.
Mhm.
And suddenly you will find actually that these folks, I mean Ram, Krishna, or many others, they were way ahead of our times, compared to even when we look at any other person. Okay. So relative comparison is possible. The third one is sometimes, can you test it objectively? Not everything in a social setup can be tested objectively. Okay. And the one last one, if you have seen in a business setup, I mean business school, I don't know if that is done in your area, whatever you are studying or whatever you have studied, but they give you case studies. In a business school, it's very common these days, they give you a case study, and the case study has many things left open, and that is what we have to analyze. Now somebody will think, oh, case study was a new concept that came into being 100 years ago, 200 years ago. Well, no. Mahabharata and Ramayana, you can think of them, the individual narrations there, as case studies. And that is why we feel perplexed, why Bhishma did that thing, or why Bhishma did not do a certain thing. Why
Right.
Krishna did that thing, or why Krishna did not do a certain thing. Same thing for Rama and many others. Well, they made a choice what they must have thought appropriate for their times. We don't know all their circumstances, but they are left for us as a stories in such a fashion that we can actually feel stunned. We can actually meditate, very much like we saw the case study, and frankly learn from it and try to adjust it for our time, place, and circumstances. So there is nothing to be followed here blindly from what they did. Say Yaskacharya, in defining our Sanatan Dharma, he uses the definition of Sanatana. He says Sanatano Nitya Nutana, meaning Sanatan Dharma is that framework which is capable of and which is very enthusiastic about refreshing itself with time, place, and circumstances, and change in these three.
Right. Nileshji, Abrahamic religions have sort of had some very questionable positions of history, especially in terms of scientific facts. And
Hmm.
I'm sure that you can cite some of the examples from your own experiences
Hmm.
about what the relationship of Sanatan Dharam with science is.
Hmm. Yes, so I will not go into Abrahamic religions. I think those are very obvious, as you said, to many people. Again, the reason these examples occurred in this Abrahamic tradition is because of that part ism.
Mhm.
Because the same, for the same reason you see that in a communism or Marxism, which is once you decide that this is the truth and we are not going to change it, then the only job you are left with is to defend that particular position. That is not the position of a Hindu dharma. Okay, granted, sometimes you will see some not so ideal scenarios, and that can be described in a Sanskrit words as a Sanskriti, Prakruti, and Vikruti.
Mhm.
Okay, Sanskriti is like even going beyond the animistic tendencies that we have and making something so beautiful. Prakruti is as simple as if we are hungry, we should go and eat. Okay, Sanskriti would be I am hungry and I only have say one loaf of bread, but the people who are hungry there, it's not going to be sufficient for any one person. Still, I divide it. That will be a Sanskriti. And Vikruti is I am full, but still I just steal the bread from somebody else. So some these pockets of imperfections do occur everywhere around the world, but by and large what you will find is the Hinduism foundation. I told you about the foundation, but it is also based on this tattvajnan and darshan. So there is a philosophical basis and there is a darshan, which is you can think of a method or a scientific method to experience that philosophy. So the kind of conflicts that you mentioned that you saw with the Abrahamic religions never occurred in Hinduism. Now, as I said, there could be some pockets, an individual person might be a dogmatic and so on. But as a civilization, it never happened. In fact, think of what is a modern definition. What is the definition of modern science? It says it is a triangulation of explanation, prediction, and testing in the context of a theory and in the context of a background knowledge. If you go to Indian Darshana tradition, you will find this definition exactly as is given 7,000 years ago, 14,000 years ago. For example, Pratyaksha Anumana Agama Pramanani, or Pratyaksha Anumana Upamana Shabda Pramanani. What I just said, because it's a Sanskrit, somebody may not understand it. But essentially, when I said Pratyaksha Anumana Upamana Shabda Pramanani, I am saying it's a triangulation of explanation, prediction, testing in the context of a theory and in the context of a background knowledge. That is how it is. To the extent we will say Hindu Dharma is science.
Right. So is it that the Hindu Dharam sort of keeps on evolving and changing with the
Hmm.
time, or is it that the values and the morals that it has and constitutes of are going to stand the test of time?
Okay, well, there are certain things. I mean, that's again a good question. There are certain things that will never change. For example, as a principle, freedom of thought, we don't want it to change.
Right.
Or what about the absolute morals? They will also not change. I mean, they should not change. Ahimsa, okay, unnecessary violence towards somebody, okay, disturbing someone, that shouldn't change. Stealing, I mean, everyone, just not limited to Hindu Dharma, everyone understands as a moral principle that stealing is wrong,
Mhm.
stealing is bad. Okay. Now, what Hindu Dharma says, so now we'll talk about the changeable part. With the time, place, and circumstances, the things may change. It changes with who you are. And that's why it talks about the Varna and Ashrama. Okay, now Varna Ashrama also has got a bad name because people again don't understand. They don't have enough intellect to understand what it is. But you will find some twisted form of Varna and Ashram in every society of the world. But the Hinduism spent enough time to get it fine-tuned,
Mhm.
which is to say, if I am into university professor, I'm not expected to fly a fighter plane and fight in the war. Okay, and the fighter pilot is not expected to do some job of agriculture. I mean, if that's what it is. So that's how that Varna system was. So there is something that really doesn't change. Okay, I mean, our body hasn't changed through millions of years in terms of the basic constituent. Or if you look at the gene code, the chimpanzee and us, 99.99% is identical after millions and millions of years. But the changeable part is where we come into the picture. I mean, that is shaped by our modern circumstances, and so that's perfectly fine, and that's where the freedom of thought comes. Okay, I don't know if I answered your question, but There is a changeable part and there is a fixed part.
Right, right. Following up on that, you spoke about the Varna system and how if you are of a certain profession, you're not expected to do other professions as well. But I think there's also this misconception about what a Varna and what a Jati is. So could
Mm.
you please tell us what the difference is between the two?
Right. Well, actually, thank you. Great question. Well, there is a Varna, Jati, and I can also add one more, which is a ashram. Okay.
Okay.
Right. What is the difference? So Jati simply meant profession. Okay. And Varna, it meant your inclination, what things you like to do.
Mhm,
I don't know if you have heard of or seen a Japanese framework called Ikigai. There are like 4 circles, if you have seen it, right? What you would love to do,
mhm,
what you are good at, okay, what is needed by society, okay, and what you can actually end up doing, I mean, or what is, so trying to bring those together was the basis behind the Varna system, behind the Jati system, and behind the ashram system. For example, in America, when they had a Vietnam War or something like this, when they needed more soldiers, they actually went looking for other people, like saying, okay, hey, you may be doing farming, but I want you to come fight. So sometimes you can have this transition, and it's a well management of a society. So like you need certain type of workers. You might just like we do it in our modern times, we create certain incentives for people to do it. So that is a Varna, is what you like. It's a Krishna says chaturvarnyam maya srishtam guna karma vibhagasha, based on your innate abilities and based on your inclination. Then the profession is sometime you will do because of your circumstances. If you are in a village, you will do agriculture. Okay, if you are in certain place like say very dry land like Rajasthan, you might have to find a different profession. So based on that, you might find the profession. But the third one is a ashram, which is to say, in an individual life, what I did today is not exactly same thing I did 20 years ago and 20 years before that. Okay, so then there were 4 ashramas. But let me bring these all together, which is to say, whether it is what your inclination is, or what actually you are practicing as a profession, or what is your stage in your life, and therefore what will be the nature of your contribution. For example, ashrama, when you are young, you are studying, you don't know anything, you show the reverence for teacher, trust for teachers, and you study. Then you actually use that knowledge to generate prosperity. That is the grostha. Vanaprastha, now you take a mentoring role. You may still do other things, but a prominence is on the mentoring role. And when you go to sannyasa, that is a somewhat of a retirement, but also doing a more philosophical, making some philosophical contributions. But the commonality for all three of these, was there was a certain minimum common program. Okay, so for example, that niti that I talked about, ahimsa satyamasteya akama krodha lobhata, that is common to all three, whether you are in a certain ashram, whether you are in a certain varna, or whether you are in a certain jati.
mhm.
That was common for all three of them.
Nileshi, my last question to you is that, Hindu civilization has gifted the world with many of its great inventions and discoveries.
Yeah.
And there still are people who ask why we fail to sort of lead with new and additional inventions and scientific theories in terms of technology, for instance, right? There are people who keep on asking questions about why we do not have more airplanes being built here or more computers being built here. And I think the answer to that should be obvious, but it would be lovely if you can explain that to us in clearer terms for our Western audience.
Okay. No, great question again, Ojasvi. And you said the answer should be obvious. But again, you may know well too that it starts with many people. You just said Hindu civilization has given, the basics for much of a world civilization. Even that fact is not known. Okay, I mean, it's known to you, and congratulations. uh, Many of the modern inventions, I will say, in the science side, but also technology, and we should distinguish science and technology, and that is how I'm going to answer your question. What you'll find is a basis for many of the scientific theory has come from India. And I'm not saying India is the only place. Okay, it would have come around the world, but India has made a significant contribution. Again, what is the method of science? See, science begins with the critique and criticism of a myth. Like, so we hear something like Hanuman say flying, and you say, okay, how would he fly? Okay, so that's now we start critiquing it. And then somebody finds a way, like a glider can make you fly, or then an aeroplane can make you fly. Okay, so science begins with the critique of a myth, criticism of a myth. And so India, as a ancient narratives, did provide a basis. When it many people don't know that even the modern so-called allopathic medicine science, they have benefited immensely from the Ayurveda. For example, a Welcome Group in UK, I mean, the CEO of that group, he sent a team or an individual, and his job was to go in India and not return until he has extracted all the information from Ayurveda, from all the Ayurveda folks of India. And he spent some 3 years or a longer time, extracted stuff and went there. If you know the Aveda brand, Aveda, that comes from, again, a Veda, something like that. That person in here in America, Minneapolis, he hired two individuals, Ayurveda specialists from India. They worked with him for many years. And now people even don't know that Aveda has anything to do with the Ayurveda. It's actually Aveda for Ayurveda, short form for Ayurveda. So that is a science factor. But what you just said is actually justified. It's somewhat justified. People will say, oh, but India did not invent telephone and aeroplane and steam engine and stuff like that. They are partly correct, but think of it, therefore I want to separate science and technology. Science is like understanding the fundamental first principles for any discipline. Technology, if you have enough resources, if you and find a group together with enough talent, crazy folks together, and give them enough resources, enough money, things can happen. Technology can come up with some things for which a scientific basis may not exist. Actually, we have many applications like that. So technologically, they work. I mean, it takes simple as an X-ray. Once somebody by mistake found out an X-ray, that they found a picture of a bone or something. You may not exactly know what X-ray is. You may not know exactly how it works, but you may still start using that X-ray technology to take pictures, to see inside our body. So we have to separate science and technology. And especially if you consider these all inventions that you just mentioned, they came in what, last 100, 200, 300, 400 years. Okay, now think of what was happening. That's why you said correctly, the answer is obvious. You think of what happened in last 400 years of India, or last 1000 or 1500 years. Okay, I mean, there was first the Islamic invasion, and then the whole colonial invasion. Okay, and what did they do? They shut down in one after another Indian industries. But how many people know? Just take a conveyance, like the most sophisticated and most sophisticated boats, let's say, in the world, anywhere in the world, were built in India until 150 years ago. In fact, British made the Nanking Treaty with the Bombay boat workers because they needed their skills. But British, essentially colonialists, shut down one industry after another. And when the Islamic invasion happened, they didn't focus on doing anything in terms of building the prosperity. They built prosperity by stealing from others for most part. And that is the reason last 400 years, 500 years, India didn't do well. But now that is changing. Now you can see also, like, there is a lot of new inventions coming in India. And as far as the science goes, that charge is not true. Indians have always contributed to science in the past and even in the last 500 years. See, what I have done with Mahabharata and Ramayana are also new inventions. Okay, so many times when people ask me, so Nilesh, what have you done exactly? How would you summarize it? And I say, what I have done for Mahabharata and Ramayana, okay, is exactly what Kepler, Newton, and Einstein did to cosmology.
Right, right. Well, thank you so much, Nilesh ji, for coming here today and speaking on all of these issues that I think personally need more to be spoken about. Namaste and to you, and thank you so much once again. And to our audiences, please like, share, and subscribe. And we will be back with another fantastic conversation on the Festival of Bharat. Namaskar.
Namaskar, Ojasvi. Thank you.
Namaste. We hope you enjoyed this Chitti Media content. Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.